They laughed when her name was the only one left uncalled. So why did the wealthiest rancher wait until the silence to choose her? Did you put anything in it? The question hangs in the air as a tin cup tips over, coffee spilling across the table and dripping onto the floorboards. Ruth stands by the stove, flour still on her hands, the fire snapping behind her. No one moves. Outside, wind rattles the loose shutter. She wipes her hands slow, reaches for her bag, and turns toward the door without a word. But no one tries to stop her. What did he just risk losing? Tell me what you think happens next. The boards of Dust Ridge Ranch creaked under heavy boots and shifting weight. Morning wind dragged red dust across the yard, thin as smoke, settling into coat seams and the folds of dresses that had been pressed days ago and were already losing the fight. Men stood in a loose line near the rail. Some leaned, some spat, some watched with half-interest. One by one names were called, a hand raised, a nod given. A woman stepped forward, then crossed the yard beside a man who had already decided. Laughter came easy. It moved in short bursts. Boots struck wood. Spurs chimed. The smell of horses drifted in from the corral behind the main barn. Ruth Carter stood near the far end of the platform, not at the front where hope lived, not at the middle where waiting stretched thin. At the end, where things settled when there was nowhere else to go. She held a small cloth bag at her side. The strap had worn soft from use. Her knuckles pressed into it, not tight enough to show, but enough to keep her still. Another name was called. Another woman stepped forward. A man tipped his hat. They walked off together. No one looked back. The list grew shorter. A young cowboy near the rail shifted his weight and let out a low whistle, not aimed at anyone in particular, but loud enough to carry. Guess some folks came a long way for nothing. A couple of men chuckled. Not cruel, not kind, just noise to fill the space. Ruth didn't move. The wind pushed a strand of hair loose near her temple. She didn't fix it. Her eyes stayed forward, not searching, not asking. A boot scraped behind her. Someone passed. Then another. The platform cleared in pieces, like a room after supper when everyone finds a reason to stand. No one said her name. The man with the paper folded it once, twice. Looked down the line again as if something might appear that hadn't been there before. It didn't. That's it, he said, voice carrying just enough to end it. Chairs shifted. A few men turned away. One of them laughed under his breath. Another reached for his hat. Ruth remained where she was. Across the yard, a gate creaked. A horse stamped once against packed earth. From behind the barn, a man stepped into the light. Graham Cole didn't hurry. He walked the length of the fence, one hand resting briefly on the top rail as he passed. Dust clung to his sleeves. His boots were worn but clean. He had the look of someone who had already done the morning's work before most men had found their coffee. A few heads turned. Conversation thinned. He stopped at the edge of the platform, not climbing it. Just stood there, eyes moving once across the empty space, then settling. On her. Ruth met the look. Not long, not short. Enough. Nothing in her face asked for anything. The wind picked up again, pushing dust between them. It softened the edges of everything, the boards, the men, the sky beyond the ridge. Someone cleared his throat. Another shifted, waiting for the moment to pass. It didn't. Graham lifted his chin slightly, as if confirming something only he had seen. Then he spoke. She comes with me. No one answered. The words sat where they landed. The man with the folded paper blinked once, then nodded like it made sense after all. A few men glanced at each other, then away. No one laughed this time. Ruth didn't thank him. She bent, picked up her bag, and stepped down from the platform. The wood gave a small groan under her weight, then stilled. She walked past the men without slowing, past the rail, past the place where she had been standing a moment ago and had not been chosen. Graham turned and headed toward the barn. He didn't look back to see if she followed. After a second, she did. Their steps fell out of rhythm at first, then found something close enough to keep moving. Behind them, the yard filled again with low voices, chairs scraping, the ordinary sounds of a morning that had already decided how it would be remembered. Ahead, the barn doors stood open. Light cut across the floor in long strips. A horse shifted inside, the leather of a saddle creaking as it moved. Ruth stepped into the shadow first, then into the light beyond it. She didn't look back. The dust settled where she had been standing, and no one called her name. The road to Blackstone Ranch cut through low hills and dry grass that whispered against itself in the wind. Wagon ruts had hardened into grooves, and Graham's horse followed them without needing a hand on the reins. Ruth walked beside, a half step behind, her bag resting against her hip with each stride. Neither of them spoke. By the time the main house came into view, the sun had climbed high enough to flatten the land in pale gold. Blackstone stretched wide across the valley. Fences ran long and straight. A water tower stood near the far corral. Smoke lifted from the main chimney in a thin gray line. Men were already at work. A hammer struck wood somewhere near the barn. A gate slammed. A dog barked once, then stopped. When they reached the yard, a few heads turned. Not openly. Just enough. Graham dismounted, looped the reins over the hitch rail, and stepped toward the house. He didn't gesture, didn't explain. Just moved like he expected things to follow their course. Ruth stepped up onto the porch behind him. The boards were smoother here, worn down by years of boots and weather. The door opened before they reached it. Harlan Pike filled the doorway. He had the look of a man who had been standing there long enough to know what was coming and not like it. His shirt sleeves were rolled tight, suspenders stretched across his chest, beard trimmed short but uneven at the jaw. His eyes went from Graham to Ruth and back again. "That's so?" he said, voice low, like he was asking the wood instead of the man. Graham stepped past him into the house. "Kitchen's been short," he said. "That's fixed." Harlan didn't move right away. Then he stepped aside, slow, giving just enough room. Ruth walked through. Inside, the air held the smell of coffee gone cold and something burnt at the edges. A long table sat near the window. Tin cups lined one end. A ledger lay open with a pencil set across it. Harlan shut the door behind them. The sound carried. "There's a room off the back," he said, not looking at her. "Small. It'll do." Ruth nodded once. He led her down a narrow hall where the floor dipped slightly in the middle. The room he opened had a single bed, a chair with one uneven leg, and a window that faced the fence line. Dust had settled on the sill in a thin layer. "No lock," he added, like it mattered. Ruth set her bag on the chair. The leg wobbled, then steadied. Harlan stood there a moment longer, then turned away. "The stove's yours," he called back over his shoulder. 5 o'clock comes early here." The kitchen sat apart from the main room, built on like an afterthought. The door hung a little crooked. Inside, blackened pans stacked near the wall, and a stove that had seen too many seasons without being cleaned proper. Ruth tied her sleeves back without a word. She filled a basin from the pump out back. The handle groaned with each pull, water coming up cold and clear, splashing against the wood. She carried it in, set it down, and began. Cloth against metal, slow at first, then steady. Outside, boots crossed the yard. Voices passed by the open window. Laughter came and went, not aimed at anything she could answer. She scrubbed the stovetop until the black gave way in places to dull gray. She stacked the pans by size, set the spoons together, cleared a corner of the table with the edge of her hand, pushing dust into a line before wiping it away. By late afternoon, the room had shape again, not new, but held. Graham passed the window once, leading a horse. He didn't stop, but his eyes moved in, just for a second, took in the table, the stove, the way her hands worked without pause. Then he kept walking. Supper came without announcement. Men filed in, chairs dragging loud across the floor. They sat where they always had. No one asked where to go. Ruth brought the pot from the stove. Steam rose up, carrying the smell of beans and salt pork. Simple. Enough. She set bowls one by one. A man at the end of the table dipped his spoon, tasted, and paused. Not long. Just enough to notice. Then he ate again. No one said anything. The sound of spoons against tin filled the room. Halfway through, a hand knocked a cup sideways. Coffee spread across the table, dripping to the floor. The man who did it didn't look up, just reached for another cup like nothing had happened. Ruth stepped forward, took a cloth, and wiped it clean. No hurry, no glance. The chair legs scraped again as someone shifted. When the meal ended, a few men lingered. Most left quick, boots thudding back out into the yard. Ruth gathered the bowls, stacked them by the basin, and began again. Water, cloth, metal. The rhythm settled in. Later, when the light thinned and the wind cooled, a sharp sound cut through the quiet from the corral. A horse kicked hard against the rail. Once, then again. Ruth stepped out the back door. The air carried the smell of hay and leather. The horse stood near the far post, one leg lifted wrong, head tossing. Two men stood a distance off, watching. "She'll settle," one said, not moving. Ruth walked past them. She spoke low, not to the men, not to the yard, just to the animal as she reached it. Her hand came up slow, stopping short, then resting against its neck. The horse shuddered once, then held. She crouched, checked the leg. Her fingers moved careful along the joint. She tore a strip from the inside hem of her sleeve, wrapped it tight where the swelling had begun. No one stepped in. When she stood, the horse had gone still. Behind her, one of the men shifted his weight, like he might say something, then didn't. From the edge of the yard, Graham watched. Not close, not far. Ruth wiped her hands against her skirt. The fabric took the mark without complaint. She turned back toward the kitchen. The door creaked as it closed behind her. Inside, the stove had gone low. She added wood, waited for the flame to catch, then set the kettle back on. Outside, the wind moved through the fence posts again, softer now. And somewhere in the house, a chair scraped once, then went quiet. The cold came early that year. It settled in the mornings first, thin as frost along the edges of the pump handle, then deeper, biting through sleeves and settling into bone before noon. Breath showed in the air. Water stiffened in the basin if left too long. Ruth rose before the light. The stove took longer to catch. She fed it small pieces at first, then larger ones, waiting for the flame to hold steady before setting the pot. Coffee grounds went in last. She measured them by habit, not by sight. Outside, boots crossed the yard slower than before. Less talk, more wind. Supplies had begun to thin. The ledger on the main table filled with shorter entries. Salt pork cut smaller. Beans stretched with water. No one said it out loud, but the air carried it. Pressure. That morning, the smell of coffee reached the front room before the men did. One by one they came in, shoulders hunched, hands held close to the heat. Ruth set the bowls in place. No one knocked anything over. No one laughed. Spoons dipped. Bread broke. Coffee poured. Then it started. A chair pushed back too fast. The sound cut sharp across the room. A man leaned forward, one hand on the table, the other pressed to his stomach. Another stood halfway, then stopped, like he wasn't sure if his legs would hold. "Something's off," someone said. The words moved quick after that. Low at first, then louder. A cup tipped. Coffee ran across the wood, dripping to the floor. No one reached to clean it. Harlan stepped in from the side door, already looking toward the kitchen before anyone spoke to him. "What did you put in it?" he asked, not raising his voice. Ruth stood by the stove, one hand on the spoon, the other resting against the edge of the table. She didn't answer. A man near the far end bent over, bracing himself against the wall. Another cursed under his breath. The room tightened. Harlan moved forward, slow, steady, like he had been waiting for this moment to arrive. "I told you," he said, not looking at anyone but her now. This wasn't going to hold. No one stepped between them. The door opened again. Cold air came in first. Then Graham. He paused just inside, took in the room in one sweep. The chairs, the men, the spilled coffee, the silence that had turned sharp. His eyes moved to Ruth. She met the look. Flour still dusted her hands, a small mark along her wrist where the skin had caught on the stove edge earlier that morning. Nothing in her face asked for help. The room waited. Graham took a step forward, then another. His boots sounded louder than usual on the floor. He stopped a few feet from her. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something else. He didn't. "Did you put anything in it?" The words landed flat. Not loud, not harsh, but they stayed. No one spoke after that. Ruth didn't move right away. The stove cracked once behind her, the fire shifting under the iron. She looked at him, not long, not searching, just enough to hold the space where the question had been placed. Then she turned, set the spoon down, reached for the cloth hanging by the basin, and wiped her hands clean. Slow, careful, as if the motion mattered more than anything else in the room. She crossed to the back, stepped into her small room, and lifted her bag from the chair. The leg wobbled once, then steadied. When she came back through, no one stopped her. Harlan watched. Didn't smile. Didn't speak. Graham didn't move. Ruth passed him without brushing his sleeve. The door opened. The wind came in again, colder now. She stepped out onto the porch. The boards held under her weight, the same as they had the day before. The yard stretched wide in front of her. Fences, barn, the line of hills beyond. She walked, across the yard, past the pump, past the place where the horse had stood. No one called after her. Behind her, the door closed. Inside, the stove fire burned steady. Outside, her footprints marked the frost for a few steps, then faded where the ground turned dry again. At the edge of the road, she didn't stop, didn't look back. The wind took the dust and carried it low across the ground, smoothing the path behind her until it was like she had never stood there at all. By nightfall, the kitchen at Blackstone Ranch had gone cold. The stove still held heat, but no one fed it. A pot sat where it had been left. The surface hardened at the edges. Cups lined the table, some empty, some not, none touched. Men came in and out without settling. Boots paused at the doorway, then moved on. The room felt smaller without anyone saying so. Graham stood near the window longer than usual that evening. The glass had a thin line of frost along the bottom. He wiped it once with his thumb, then stopped. Outside, the yard looked the same. Fence, barn, pump. No movement where there should have been. Harlan stepped in behind him, closing the door with his heel. "Food's bad," he said. "Whole batch. Could have been worse." Graham didn't turn. Harlan waited a second, then moved to the table, picked up a spoon, set it back down. "Storage has been off," he added. "Meat came in wrong last week." "I said as much." Graham's hand rested against the window frame. "Still." "You said it after," he replied. Harlan let out a short breath. "Doesn't change the fact." Silence sat between them. Graham turned then, slow. His eyes moved over the table, the pot, the empty doorway to the kitchen beyond. "Where's the ledger from the last delivery?" he asked. Harlan hesitated. "Just a flicker." "In the office," he said. Graham crossed the room without hurry, opened the ledger where it lay, pages marked with thumbprints and small notes along the margins. He flipped back 3 days, then 4. Stopped, ran his finger once along the line where the entry had been scratched out and rewritten. The date didn't match the mark on the crate still sitting out back. He closed the book. The sound carried. Harlan shifted his weight. "You looking to blame someone? You'll find it anywhere you want." Graham stepped past him. "Pack your things," he said. Harlan laughed once like it didn't land. Then he saw it did. "You're letting her walk," he said, voice tightening now. "Over a guess." Graham didn't answer. Harlan's jaw worked. He looked toward the door, then back again. "Fine," he said. "Your ranch." He grabbed his coat from the peg and pushed out into the night. The door hit the frame harder than it needed to. Graham stayed where he was a moment longer. Then he moved. Out the door, across the yard, past the pump. The road lay open under the thin light of a rising moon. He saddled without calling for help. The leather creaked under his hands, familiar, steady. He checked the cinch twice, then swung up. No one stopped him. By morning, he was already past the ridge. The Wyoming Trail ran long and narrow, cutting through open land where the wind had room to move. Small towns sat along it like markers. 2 buildings, maybe 3. A well, a hitch rail. He stopped where he had to, asked little, listened more. "A woman came through," he'd say. Most shrugged. One pointed west. "Small bag," the man added. "Didn't stay." Graham nodded once and moved on. Days passed in that same rhythm. Dust, road, questions. At a place just past a bend in the creek, he found it. Not much more than a lean-to built against a larger wall. A sign hung crooked above the door. Paint worn thin, letters barely holding. Inside, the air smelled of grease and coffee. A few tables, 2 men at the far end. A stove near the back. Ruth stood behind it. Her sleeves were rolled, hair tied back, hands moving the same way they had in his kitchen. Slow, sure, like nothing had changed. She didn't look up right away. He stepped in. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. One of the men glanced over, then back to his plate. Ruth set a cup down, poured coffee, wiped the edge with a cloth. Then she looked, not surprised, just aware. Graham took a step forward, then stopped near the counter. "I asked the wrong question," he said. "No build to it, no explanation." The words stayed where they landed. Ruth held his gaze a moment, then reached for another cup, set it down, poured. She slid it across the counter, not close enough to touch. Graham looked at it, then back at her. Steam rose between them, thin and steady. Outside, a wagon rolled past. The wheels ground against dirt. A horse snorted. Inside, no one spoke. Ruth turned back to the stove, lifted the lid on the pot, stirred once, set it back. Graham didn't move. The cup sat between them, cooling. Time stretched. He didn't reach for it. Didn't say anything more. After a while, he stepped back. The floorboard under his boot gave a small sound. Ruth didn't look up. He turned toward the door. Stopped once, like he might say something else. Didn't. Then he walked out into the light. The bell above the door gave a soft ring as it closed behind him. Inside, the coffee went still. Ruth stood where she was, one hand resting on the edge of the stove. The steam thinned, then disappeared. She lifted the cup he hadn't touched, poured it back into the pot, and set the cup upside down to dry. No one asked what that had been. The day moved on. Plates filled, chairs scraped. A wagon stopped outside, then left again. The same small rhythm held the place together. But something had shifted. That evening, she stepped out back after the last plate was washed. The sky had gone wide and pale, the kind that comes before a cold night. The creek beyond the bend caught the last of the light, thin and silver. She stood there longer than she needed to, then went back inside. A week later, the road to Blackstone Ranch lay quiet under a low sky. Graham rode in near dusk. The yard looked as it had the day he left. Same fence line, same barn doors, same pump handle leaning just a little to the right. But the kitchen window held light. Not the dull kind that comes from a low fire. A steady one. He dismounted without tying the reins. Let the horse stand where it stopped. His boots crossed the yard, slow, measured. The porch boards gave under his weight. He opened the door. Inside, the table was set. Not full, not empty. Enough. A pot sat on the stove, lid tilted just enough for steam to slip through. The smell reached him first. Beans, bread, something cooked low and patient. Ruth stood at the counter, back to him. She didn't turn right away. He stepped in, closed the door behind him. The latch clicked into place. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she lifted the knife, cut through a loaf, set the pieces aside. The blade met wood with a soft, even sound. "You'll want to eat while it's hot," she said. Her voice held the same line it always had. No rise, no fall. Graham took a step closer, stopped at the edge of the table. He looked at the place set near the end. Not at the head, not apart. Just there. "I didn't come to ask you back," he said. She set the knife down. "I know." A small pause. The stove shifted. The fire caught again under the iron. "The ranch needs someone who can run it," he went on. "Not just keep it going." Ruth wiped her hands on the cloth, turned then, just enough to face him. "You had that," she said. He didn't answer right away. Outside, the wind moved along the side of the house, brushing against the boards like a hand passing over wood. "I didn't stand when I should have," he said. The words stayed low. Ruth looked at him, not searching, not soft, just there. Then she turned back to the stove, lifted the pot, set it on the table. "Sit," she said. Graham pulled the chair out. The legs scraped once across the floor. He sat. She filled the bowl, set it in front of him. Steam rose between them, carrying the smell of something simple done right. He took the spoon, paused, then ate. No one spoke. The quiet wasn't empty. It held. After a while, Ruth took the chair across from him. Not close, not far. She didn't eat, just rested her hands on the table. Outside, a horse shifted near the rail. The sound carried in, soft and steady. Graham finished the bowl, set the spoon down. She reached across, took it, set it with the others. When she stood, she moved to the counter, lifted a small ring of keys from a hook by the door. Metal tapped against metal once. She walked back, set them down near his hand. Not pushed, not offered, placed. Graham looked at them, then at her. "They're yours," he said. Ruth pulled out the chair at the end of the table, sat, folded her hands in her lap. "They were always going to be," she replied. No smile, no edge, just truth. The light from the window had gone softer now, the last of the day slipping behind the ridge, leaving the room in a low gold that held to the edges of things. Graham didn't reach for the keys. Not yet. He stayed where he was. Across from him, Ruth leaned back slightly in the chair, as if settling into a place that didn't need to be claimed out loud. No one said anything else. The stove burned steady. The table held. Outside, the wind moved across the land, carrying the last of the cold with it. Inside, neither of them left, and this time neither of them had to be asked to stay. If you stood there in that quiet room, you might not notice it at first. No grand words, no promises spoken out loud. Just a table, a fire, and two people who had learned the hard way what it means to lose something before you understand its worth. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've been the one who walked away without looking back, because staying would have meant standing where you weren't truly seen. Or maybe you've been the one left behind, holding on to a moment you wish you could take back, knowing silence can cost more than any mistake. What held them there wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the quiet decision to stop pretending, to show up differently, to stand, even when it would have been easier to stay still. Sometimes love doesn't come in loud declarations. Sometimes it's a chair pulled out, a meal shared, a choice to remain when no one's asking you to. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not leave again. If this story reminded you of a moment you've lived, or one you're still carrying, tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know who's out there listening. There are more stories like this waiting, stories about people who almost walked past each other, and what happened when they didn't. If that's something you believe in, you're welcome to stay a little longer with us.